good immigration policy that'll lead to strong economic growth to keep us as the greatest country in the world. So I do hope to hear the testimony today and work with all of you to make sure we come up with good, sound public policy for America. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Ranking Member Correa. I now recognize the chairman for the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins. And good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the joint hearing on the Subcommittee of Border Security Enforcement and the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence. I thank my good friend and Chairman Higgins for convening this important hearing, a hearing to examine the heartbreaking realities and the high cost to Americans and those making the treacherous journey to the southwest border due to the Biden administration's failure to secure that very border. And this abject failure has unfortunately resulted in tragedies across the country and specifically in my home state of Texas. In fact, here with us today is Ms. Elisa Tambunga and her family, and I thank you for joining us. Elisa is a mother, but she lost her own mother, 71-year-old mother, and her 7-year-old daughter recently when they were killed in a car crash in Ozona, Texas, when a human trafficker smuggling 11 illegal aliens was recklessly driving his vehicle, evading capture from the local police department, and struck the vehicle of Maria and Amelia, the 71-year-old grandmother and 7-year-old daughter. Elisa, thank you for being here today. The heartbreaking story that we face, unfortunately, is not the only one, and there are far too many. And I appreciate you being willing to share your stories here so that others don't have to go through that pain and tragedy. When you talk about Amelia and Maria, and you hear their stories, I've been told that Amelia was an outgoing fashionista. She was ready to take on the world. She dreamed of being a teacher, a social media influencer. She was active in sports. She was a model student at Ozona Elementary School, and she loved to play with her friends and dance with her Aunt Jenny and cook with her grandmother, Maria, who was also a dedicated member of the community. We also have Mr. Ramirez, who's a 9th-generation Texan here with us, a rancher from South Texas, who's in the 5th generation of the operations in the ranching business. And Mr. Ramirez, thank you for being here to share the stories about how this tragedy, this crisis, the chaos is impacting our agriculture business, the very business that feeds our nation. And we look forward to hearing your stories and your perspective. But this crisis has also resulted in the suffering and the death of so many migrants who make this journey to the border. Earlier this month, I led a bipartisan delegation to South America, to several countries in Central and South America, and that provided a firsthand look into some of the issues that are being faced there that are also facing us here. During this visit, we were able to meet with national security and law enforcement leaders in Brazil, Colombia, and Panama to not only discuss the rising threat of the Chinese Communist Party's influence in the region, but to investigate the evolving and sophisticated threat of transnational criminal organizations and the migration crisis that these countries are also experiencing as a result of a massive pull factor from the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas' failed immigration policies. Notably, we were able to visit the Darien region of Panama, where we toured a migrant village known as Baja Chiquito that migrants encountered in Panama after a grueling 7, 8, 9, 10-day journey through a very dangerous jungle known as the Darien region. There, approximately 1,500 to 2,000 migrants are encountered daily. They are coming out of the jungle in this treacherous journey. I'd like to put this in context. The Panamanian National Migration Service has reported that in the first 6 months of this year, 200,000 migrants have made that journey through the Darien region. From 2015 to 2021, in a 6-year period, there were only 97,000 total people that went through there. So what has changed? When I talk to these people, Sri Lankans, Africans from Nigeria, many people from Venezuela, as my colleague just mentioned, they all had one thing in common. They're headed to the United States because they know that it's open. We visited several other camps, and the tragedies that we saw from these migrants, a small boy, 8 years old, I will never forget his face. The cuts, the bruises, the scrapes, the damage to his legs from going through that jungle area, and then to think about the psychological damages. This child went through a very, very difficult journey. He could hardly walk on his own, not to mention the assaults that are happening to the young women, and the harrowing stories that each one of these people has to tell. We were briefed as well by Panamanian officials on Panama's operations in the Darien region, to include Panama's National Border Services SENAFRONT about their work to register migrants using what's known as BITMAP, the Biometric Identification Transnational Border Migration Alert Program. And we learned that Panama leads the BITMAP program in enrollments and identifications of known and suspected terrorists, recently surpassing 100,000 BITMAP checks and identifications of those 100,000 of over 100 known or suspected terror matches and a dozen Interpol criminal matches as well. This is extremely concerning, as it is a significant increase, as I mentioned earlier, from prior years. According to DHS data, so far in fiscal 23, U.S. Border Patrol has encountered 140 individuals with derogatory information in the terrorist screening data set between ports of entry, in addition to 98 individuals encountered in fiscal year 2022. These figures compare to only 3 such individuals apprehended in fiscal year 2020, 0 in 19, 2 in 2017. What's changed? That's why we're here today. Let me point out as well that in the last Congress, in the 117th Congress, the DHS refused to release these numbers of potential known or suspected terrorists attempting to illegally cross into the United States. And only by holding them accountable were we able to ensure that this information was disclosed, as it previously was in previous administrations, to the public. At the same time, in that period of time since President Biden has been in office, over 1.5 million illegal alien gotaways, and this is known gotaways, has successfully crossed the border undetected or detected but unapprehended, and are now in the United States. These known gotaways they don't provide biometric or biographic information to U.S. Border Patrol agents. We don't know, in fact, when Secretary Mayorkas is here, he can't tell us who these people are. He doesn't know what their background is, what their intentions are, their criminal or terrorist affiliations. And there are some who may argue against the common sense reality that individuals on the terror watch list streaming across our border at record rates pose a threat to America's national security, both those apprehended between the ports of entry and those among the 1.5 million known gotaways since fiscal year 2021. These are fundamentally unserious arguments. This is a national security issue. Only an administration unserious about border security would continue to defend the very policies that have encouraged this chaos. There is also no doubt that the Biden administration's policies and rhetoric are encouraging hundreds of thousands of migrants to make the life-threatening journey through this area every single year, just like those that I encountered in the Darien region. These same policies incentivize millions of people from around the world to place themselves at the mercy of transnational criminal organizations, trafficking organizations, and other malign actors just to get here to the United States. Aside from the humanitarian crisis these failed policies have created, our nation is also battling a drug epidemic that is fueled by the illicit flow of fentanyl, xylazine, methamphetamines, and heroin that are crossing our southwest border at record numbers. More than 1,500 people per week die and are poisoned and die from taking some type of opioid, which we've never experienced a number like that in the history of this country. Securing our border is a critical first step to reversing this trend. Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden's failure to lead has left our country less secure. We must secure our border, and this committee will continue to hold the administration accountable for their action and, most importantly, for their inaction. The human cost, both to Americans and migrants alike, is far too high to continue to willfully ignore, because doing so is politically expedient. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here. You are part of the solution, to helping us come up with ways to hold the administration accountable. And it is my personal opinion that we have plenty of laws on the books for our Border Patrol, our customs agents, ICE, and other agencies to do the job that they need to do to secure our border. And my last thought is, it is incredible to think that the administration is suing the state of Texas for doing the very job that the federal government should be doing according to Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Pfluger. I now recognize the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Migration from South and Central America to the United States is a great humanitarian challenge. The migrants coming to our southern border are escaping poverty and political persecution to build a better life. They want to work, contribute to our economy, and build a future for their children free from fear. Just like my ancestors who fled poverty in Ireland and Eastern Europe, just like the Pilgrims who escaped persecution and landed at Plymouth, and just like the ancestors of many of the people in this room, they see the United States as a beacon of hope, because that's what we've always been. We are the greatest nation in the world because we are the shining city on the hill that has said to the world, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And in many cases, the migrants coming to the southern border in search of a better life are seeking to come to our country legally. I'll say it again. In many cases, they are seeking to come legally because under our laws, in many cases, the migrants are entitled to legal asylum. Unfortunately, many migrants on their journeys to the United States face danger from drug cartels, human traffickers, and gun smugglers. Human smugglers charge extortionary fees and sometimes leave migrants trapped to die in sweltering cargo containers at the side of the road. Women and children have been kidnapped and assaulted. And even when the migrants are able to avoid abusive cartels, many die on their arduous journey. And those fortunate enough to complete the journey to our border are met with a system in which it can take weeks or months for their legal asylum claims to be processed. Dying of thirst, starvation, and disease, and running out of time, some seek to enter the country between legal ports of entry out of sheer desperation. And of course, it is not just migrants who have fallen victim to the cartels and the human traffickers and the gun smugglers. American citizens have suffered too. Ms. Tambuga, I want to thank you for coming here tonight, and I want to thank you for sharing your story. What you have suffered is unimaginable, and I am deeply sorry for the loss of your mother, Maria, and your daughter, Amelia. I read in an interview you gave that you said, I just need this to not happen again to anybody else. I need it to not happen again to another mother, and that you want action, not words. We could all not agree with you more. Your call to action is desperately needed, and we owe it to you and to all of the victims of the humanitarian crisis at the border to set aside politics and work together in a bipartisan manner to pass comprehensive immigration reform and border security. We need a more orderly and streamlined system at ports of entry so that migrants can have their legal asylum claims processed without having to wait for weeks or months in squalid camps or become dependent on human traffickers to get between points of entry. In my conversation with Border Patrol leadership, they were clear that they support a more streamlined system for migrants to seek legal asylum at ports of entry so that Border Patrol agents can be freed up to focus their efforts on the bad actors smuggling guns and drugs between ports of entry. And I want to make sure that their words are heard in this committee. What Border Patrol is saying, and we should listen to them, is that we need a better, more streamlined system for migrants to be processed at legal ports of entry so that Border Patrol's resources and bandwidth can be freed up between ports of entry to focus on the bad guys. We need to build on the work of the last Congress to increase staffing at the border, both at and in between ports of entry, and to improve technology to detect illegal crossings and contraband. The Biden administration has begun this work. New technology and enhanced staffing authorized in the 117th Congress is being deployed across the border as we speak. Illegal crossings are down significantly since the expiration of the Trump administration's Title 42 policy. The CBP One app is succeeding in creating a more orderly system at ports of entry and in turn reducing crossings between ports of entry. That's the way it's supposed to work. There is more work to do, but the path ahead is clear. Bipartisan solutions instead of political grandstanding. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses because their feedback is vital in how we do this work. But first, I have to make one last very important point. We will never defeat the evil of the cartels and the traffickers by adopting cruel tactics or retreating from our American values. At least 5,500 children were separated, and likely more that we still don't know about, under the Trump administration's family separation policy. 5,500 children that we know about. Of those 5,500 children, more than 500 were under 5 years of age when they were forcibly separated from their parents. As a new parent myself, this is unconscionable, and it should outrage everyone here. Today, years later, there are still hundreds of children who have not been reunited with their parents. One woman named Jessica, fleeing El Salvador and seeking legal asylum in America after MS-13 beat her and threatened to kill her and her children, arrived in the United States in 2018, only to have the Trump administration take away her 4- and 10-year-old sons. Their story is part of the human cost of the humanitarian crisis at the border. It is also despicable that the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, sent agents to Texas to fool migrants into coming to Florida so that he could send them to Massachusetts as a political stunt. This article details the story of 22-year-old Eduardo, his wife, and their 7-year-old daughter, who endured abduction and beatings by a Mexican cartel as they journeyed from Peru to the US-Mexico border in search of a better life. When Eduardo and his family reached the US, they applied for legal asylum and stayed at a migrant center while awaiting the processing of their application. They met a woman working for Governor DeSantis who lied to them, promising a job and shelter if they would board a flight to Massachusetts. Of course, the Massachusetts authorities were never alerted to this plot. And Florida taxpayers paid for this disgusting stunt by the Florida governor for his political gain. Children taken away from their parents by grandstanding politicians looking for headlines, grieving parents who still do not know where their children are today. And now, another grandstanding politician, the governor of Texas, has launched an operation in which agents were allegedly ordered to push children into the Rio Grande River and deny water to migrants. This is not who we are, and it does not make anyone safer. So when we talk about the human cost of the border crisis, don't forget these humans. Children, parents, separated, kidnapped, and hurt by politicians looking for headlines. So let me be clear. I and my Democratic colleagues on the subcommittee will work with anyone on either side of the aisle who is serious about making the border safer for American citizens and for migrants. There are real solutions we can work toward together, and we will work with anyone. But we will not stand by and allow selfish politicians to make the humanitarian crisis worse by abusing migrants seeking a better life. We can build an immigration system that is safe, fair, and orderly if we just put politics aside and work together with American values. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Magaziner. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to welcome our first panel of witnesses. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I'd like to now formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Todd Bensman is a Senior National Security Fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies and has over 20 years of journalism experience covering national security, with a particular focus on the southwest border. Mr. Bensman also worked for the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division. Mr. Javier, is it Javier? Mr. Javier J.R. Martinez is the general manager of Chaparosa Ranch in La Prairie, Texas, where his family has been ranching since 1932. He's a fifth-generation rancher and manages all ranch business, including their extensive wildlife management program. Mr. Martinez sits on the board of directors for the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Ranchers Association. Ms. Eliza Tambunga is the mother of Amelia Tambunga and the daughter of Maria Tambunga, who were both victims of a high-speed illegal alien pursuit in March of 2023, which tragically cost both of their lives. We extend our sincerest condolences, ma'am. Mr. David J. Beer is the Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. His research focuses on immigration, border security, and interior enforcement. I thank the witnesses for being here today. The witnesses' full statements will appear in the record. And I now recognize Mr. Bensman for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the impacts from the worst mass migration crisis ever to have stricken the United States at the southern border. This is a single ongoing event with a traceable start date, smashing every record on government books for 30 months straight. Biden administration policies have allowed at least 4 million foreign nationals, including 1.7 million undetected gotaways, to illegally enter and stay in the United States. Those millions of needy, uninsured, illegal immigrants are having transformative impacts on American civil society in several ways that we'll hear about soon. But one impact that millions of Americans can feel right away is rarely addressed, and I want to address that here. That is that Biden's border crisis, what Biden's border crisis is doing to America's public school districts. To degrees that may vary from place to place, this will manifest as acute space shortages and classroom overcrowding, successive tax hiking bond elections to purchase portable classrooms and build new schools, hiring binges for more administrators, janitors, security officers, school cafeteria workers, and English as second language teachers, language barriers where students who can't read or write but must mix in anyway and take standardized tests, declining academic performance, and new social problems like gang formation and behavioral difficulties. A main feature of the border crisis, the Biden border crisis, and also of the much smaller, earlier Trump swell in late 2018 and 2019 is that it is more child-centric than any before. Immigrants and family groups began to really pour over the border after the world discovered a certain legal loophole called the Flores Settlement that got them out of detention and deportation and release into America in under 21 days to pursue asylum claim for years. Another discovered loophole, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, let non-Mexican unaccompanied minors go free within 3 days. This sparked rushes on the border of unaccompanied minors. Whether in families or alone and unaccompanied, school-aged children poured in until President Trump started expelling them under Remain in Mexico and then Title 42. That's the pandemic and instant expulsion policy added in March 2020. But then the Biden administration reopened the spigot by creating exemptions in Title 42 for most families, all unaccompanied minors, and many pregnant and postpartum women. That set the rush off again into our country of children. The public is never told how many school-age children got through these policy openings, but I estimate that it is probably as high or higher than 1.2 million. No one really knows, but it's not going away anytime soon. What we know is that school districts across America had to enroll them under a 1982 Supreme Court ruling regardless of immigration status, numbers, costs, or hardships. So to find out what that might look like, last year I conducted field research on the Cleveland Independent School District, 40 miles northeast of Houston in Liberty County. From between 60,000 and 100,000 mostly immigrant families from earlier border surges settled there in an unincorporated community called Colony Ridge and sent their kids to CISD. Everyone I talked to, including the school superintendent, told me most are illegally present. Here's CISD's story in a nutshell. Enrollments tripled from 3,693 K through 12 students and 4 main schools in 2012 to more than 12,000 in 2022. CISD is now 12 schools and 60 portable classrooms. Plans call for $1.2 billion, that's with the B, expansion, to 20 more schools over the next decade to accommodate a projected student body of 20,000. A decade ago, CISD was 40% Hispanic, now it's 90%. Here's some findings. The district has repeatedly asked voters to approve massive tax spiking bond elections. $85 million in 2017, $198 million in 2019, $150 million in 2021, $115 million in 2022, and it just goes on, they can't stop. The district has suffered declines in academic performance due to language barriers. Those with limited English proficiency spiked from 20% in 2012 to 55% in 2022. English as a second language curricula now makes up more than half of all curricula. The entire teaching staff is required to attain state ESL certification or an equivalent. Many new students were teenagers who couldn't read or write. Nearly half of Cleveland High School's students and 60% of Cleveland Middle School students were at risk of dropping out. Gangs and drug trafficking are problems. This is just one school district, maybe an extreme case, but scattered media reporting suggests it's emblematic. Many are struggling to protect students who are already there from degraded instruction and parents from tremendous new tax burdens across America. I'm happy to answer any questions about this impact or others described in my longer testimony on file. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bensman. I now recognize Mr. Martinez for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins, Ranking Member Correa, Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the subcommittees. On behalf of cattle raisers in the Southwest, thank you for inviting me to provide an update on the state of the border. My name is J.R. Ramirez. I live in La Prairie, Texas, where I manage 2 commercial cow-calf operations, each with extensive wildlife management programs. My family has been ranching in Zapata County since 1932 on Circle 17 Ranch, and I am part of the 5th generation involved in the operation. I am testifying today on behalf of the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. TSCRA was founded in 1877 and is one of the largest and oldest livestock associations in our nation. We represent 26,000 cattle raisers who believe in the future of the beef industry and seek to see it thrive. But that reality has become more difficult with the growing challenges along our southern border. Illegal immigration and lack of border security have changed ranching as we know it. Damaged fences and gates, high-speed chases, break-ins, stolen vehicles, and trespassing are daily occurrences. Ranchers like me on the front lines are bearing financial burdens that are threatening our ability to operate profitable businesses. In the last 12 months, our ranch has had 30 documented cases of our fences or gates being breached by a vehicle. The least damaging of those cases cost our operation $1,000, while other incidents have surpassed $10,000 in damages. A cut fence or open gate allows cattle to escape into other pastures or neighboring ranches. When that happens, additional hours of work are put in by our entire team to gather livestock often requiring a helicopter to rectify the situation, a direct out-of-pocket cost to our ranch. These unexpected occurrences mean we may not be able to market cattle at the appropriate time or ensure that cattle breeding occurs at the right time. Our herd health can be at risk if neighboring cattle introduce disease that would otherwise not exist on our ranch. My stocking rate for livestock is limited when cattle graze sections of land that need rest as a result of cut fencing. These all take a direct hit to my potential profits on the operation. Plastic bottles, jugs, cans, backpacks, clothing, shoes, coats, and trash litter our property. I cannot clearly describe the amount of trash that now covers South Texas ranches. These materials will take hundreds of years to decompose and has led to cattle loss, as some items can be consumed and cause digestive failure in cattle. This is a long-term defacement of beautiful South Texas rangelands that will never be the same. Ranchers shoulder the burden of this financial loss. It doesn't stop there. Responsible and well-managed hunting leases are another way ranchers offset the formidable cost of ranching while also contributing to wildlife conservation within the state. High-dollar wildlife escape ranches when fences and gates are compromised. The danger along the border is so great, hunters and even landowners themselves may deem the risk on a property too high, forcing hunters to look elsewhere to hunt. When those sources of revenue are taken away, the chances of a profitable year greatly diminish. Finding employees is becoming more difficult as well because most do not want to live where their safety is at risk. Many employees who live on the ranch have their homes broken into frequently and never know when they may unexpectedly face a trespasser on the land and whether that trespasser is friendly or dangerous. My family and I cannot leave anything outside. We must hide our vehicle keys. We must look over our shoulders every minute while in our backyard or out in the pasture. My experience is unfortunately not unique. TSCRA conducted a border security survey of our members last year. The results show that the threats and challenges I face are the same ones faced by hundreds of my fellow ranchers across the state. As cattle raisers, we are doing our part to feed the world and raise the next generation of ranchers. We consistently deal with drought, inclement weather, increased input costs, and ever-fluctuating cattle prices. Those factors alone make ranching a costly endeavor and challenging livelihood. When you add in the cost resulting from the state of our border, it is almost impossible to make a profit. We cannot allow the situation to continue as it has. We must do better for our ranchers, our families, and all the citizens that are living through the crisis along the border. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez, and I apologize, I transcribed your name incorrectly on my notes, but I assure you, sir, as cowboy to cowboy, won't happen again.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. We now recognize Ms. Tambunga for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Hi, my name is Elisa Tambunga, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here today. I come to you as a young woman who no longer has a mother. I come to you as a mother who no longer has a child. I'm a United States citizen who has been horrifically failed by my own government. On March 13th, my mother, Maria Tambunga, and my 7-year-old daughter, Amelia Brooke, were murdered by a 7,000-pound vehicle-turned weapon by a man whose name is not even worth mentioning. This man was fleeing from police, going over 105 miles per hour. He was live streaming himself on Facebook. He had 11 illegal immigrants in that truck, 2 of which were killed. 4 lives taken in a matter of seconds, ultimately due to unsecured borders. I'm from a small town in West Texas named Ozona. My dad, Emilio, and my brother-in-law, Tim, who sit behind me today, and I traveled over 1,700 miles today to be here in front of you, to stress to you how big of a monster the border crisis has become. Instead of shopping for school supplies today, arguing with my little girl over crop tops or no crop tops for school, I'm here in front of you all to ask you to help me. Help American citizens feel safe again in our own backyards. I'm asking this administration to fulfill your duty to protect American citizens first. Mr. Pfluger, Mr. Gonzalez have been doing their part. Congressman Gonzalez and his staff have worked with us, the victims, to create the Epoch Accountability Act. The Epoch Alert would notify citizens of high-speed chases. The night that my mother and my daughter were so violently taken from us, there was not one person in our community that knew. The first step to keeping citizens safe is to making sure they are informed, so that maybe, just maybe, this won't happen to another family. Incidents as tragic as ours that are caused due to the lack of secured borders are not a matter of if this will happen again. It is a matter of when this will happen again. So from myself, my father Emilio, my sister Jen, and my brother-in-law Tim, we are adamant that you all hold each other accountable. A reminder that you serve us, the people, and those who have died under this administration. Our lives will never be the same. My life will never be the same. I will never be able just to pick up the phone and call my mom when I need some advice. I will never be able to hold my daughter and sing her goodnight song. But I will be able to honor them until I take my last breath. I will be their voice. I will be the voice of the communities that need it the most. Yes, we are a small town, 3,500 in population, but just because we're in a rural part of Texas doesn't mean that you can forget about us. If you work together, if we work together, I believe that we can decrease the chances of another family having to describe this pain to you. I believe that we can come together to make sure that our communities feel safe again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tambunga. I now recognize Mr. Beer for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Higgins and Pfluger, Ranking Members Correa and Magaziner, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For nearly half a century, the Cato Institute has produced original research showing that people are assets in a free society. Give people a small window of liberty and they will create, innovate, and build. Socialists count only a person's costs. Capitalists see potential. When I look at this mess of an illegal immigration system, I see the world's biggest opportunity. Few countries in the world can simply choose their demographic destiny like we can. Since the 1990s, the United States went from accounting for most of the increase in the immigrant population worldwide to accounting for less than 10% of it. We can and must reverse course. Without immigrants, our working age population would already be in decline. Immigrants are the future of America's growth. It's time our laws start reflecting that fact. Letting immigrants, many of whom are already here without the right to work, legally fill America's 10 million open jobs would blow the lid off of Congress's tepid economic growth projections. It would have added about $2 trillion to America's economic output over the last 2.5 years alone. The infusion of new consumers would lead to a renaissance in entrepreneurship, with immigrants leading the way. Immigrants are 80% more likely to start a business. In several major cities, they already account for half of all brick and mortar small businesses. They have and will revitalize struggling communities. Just as they were in the 1990s, immigrants are the antidote to the spike in crime that started in 2020. Immigrants, legal and illegal, are less than half as likely to be incarcerated in the United States. Immigrants prevent homes and businesses from going vacant, which further prevents crime. They will infuse communities with tax revenue to repair failing infrastructure. Immigrants will bring down the spiraling costs of child care and give millions of families like mine the ability to bring new Americans into this world. Americans are getting older, and while nursing homes are closing for lack of staff, and our seniors are being denied the care they deserve, there's another path open to us. Immigrants want to help. Let them do it legally. We know we need workers, from engineers to open the next generation of chip manufacturing in Arizona to seafood processors in Louisiana. But if our policies tell people that the only way to enter is to enter illegally, that's what's going to happen. But that's a policy choice. We choose the costs associated with illegal immigration every day we don't reform legal immigration. Deadly car chases, damaged property, overwhelmed border stations. These are the symptoms of not letting people come legally. A refusal to let immigrants work legally is the root cause of many of the problems we hear in communities across the country. What a waste of human potential. Legal immigration would solve these problems and many more. We chose disorder. It's time to start choosing order at the border. We know it can work. The Biden administration has piloted legal entry programs that have almost eliminated illegal immigration by Haitians, Cubans, and Nicaraguans. This is proof of concept. Much more needs to be done, and Congress should lead the way. According to the Congressional Budget Office, if Congress had passed comprehensive immigration reform in 2013, we'd now be entering a period where budget deficits would have been nearly $1 trillion lower cumulatively over the next decade. Lives can be saved, our economy revitalized, our border secured at a cost to Americans far less than the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. We're going to move into questioning. I'm going to recognize myself for questioning for 5 minutes. We have quite a task ahead of us as a nation to deal with what my colleagues have described as a worldwide migrant era and the immigration crisis that nations face worldwide. There's just some truth to that statement, but America is a land of law and order, or else we're not. And this Congress is a body made up of 435 elected representatives of citizens of the United States of America. This is the legislative body of our government. We have a responsibility to serve and protect the citizens of America first. This is a simple acknowledgement of the foundational principles of our republic. It'd be difficult to find disagreement to that, the precept on either side of the aisle. And what we face on our southern border is a disintegration of law and order. Now, there's been argument that perhaps we could make the absence of law and order more orderly and conduct our business of allowing the violation of our sovereign laws in a more effective manner. But I would argue that I choose not to be a part of a better managed decline of our nation. And I'm going to ask Mr. Bensman to give us some insight there. But before I do, Mr. Bear, I'd like to ask you respectfully, sir, have you ever been to court for litigation, a traffic court, or anything like that?
Probably at some point, I don't remember.
I mean, have you ever had to go before a court for any reason?
I'm sure I've had a ticket before, if that's what you're asking me.
It's not a trap question. The point is, we've all experienced that. And we arrive in front of that judicial procedure according to a schedule determined by the judicial system. We don't barge into the courtroom and demand that our traffic case be heard first. We don't overpower the deputies guarding the door and demand that the judge hear our case. This is what's happening in our southern border. It's overwhelming our system, and the backlog for judicial procedures is incredible. Impact similar to what Mr. Bensman talked about with our schools. This is injuring America. Mr. Bensman, your background gives you a tremendous experience covering national security issues extensively, specifically regarding immigration. How would you count the number of illegal aliens that are currently in our country, both from prior administrations and for decades of presence here in our country? What would you put that number at?
The Center for Immigration Studies, before this mass migration crisis we agreed with the 12 million figure. We can no longer say it's 12 million, though. We have to say it's 16 million. We can't just talk about the presence of illegals inside the United States as 12 million anymore.
So as we move forward as a Congress to discuss immigration law and border security enforcement, would we not, based upon your experience, is it not the responsibility of Congress to get a grasp upon the number of aliens actually present in our country so we can stop guessing?
Sure, of course. I mean, at some point, the government will have to resume interior enforcement operations. Interior enforcement operations have been suspended by and large for 2.5 years. At some point, we're going to have to, somebody will decide, well, there are judges' orders, removal orders that have to be enforced again, and we'll have to be able to plan.
Sir, I concur that would be ideal. My time has expired. Let me just close by saying that I believe the number is far greater, and I think it should be part of our narrative that we discuss across the aisle to determine the number of illegal aliens present in our country, so we can get a handle on what needs to be done there. My time has expired, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Correa, for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I essentially concur with your statements and just wanted to, first of all, Ms. Tambuga, I just want to let you know my daughter's name is Amelia as well. And so I can't imagine your tragic situation. My heart and prayers go out to you and your family. Mr. Byer, we're here to address specific issue of the challenges these individuals have at the border. High-speed chase, you got somebody, 11 people in that van, did you say? How do you stop the cartels? How do you take away the profit? How do you stop them from making money off the system?
Well, we know that this is a $13 billion industry. And
$13 billion.
$13 billion, that's a lowball estimate. We don't see all the money that's transferred. We can't measure it, but we can have surveys of this is how much people are saying they're paying, and it's $5,000 to $10,000 to people who are going to smuggle them into the United States. We could defund that billion-dollar industry with legal immigration reform, and we know we can do it because we have now examples of it happening. Cubans largely entered the country legally for decades at the U.S.-Mexico border. For decades, they entered the country legally. There was no illegal immigration problem among Cubans. And then the Trump administration said, no more. We're not going to let them apply legally anymore. Shut down the border. And what happened? We had a huge illegal immigration problem by Cubans showing up in Texas, Every single member who studied this issue can remember the problem in 2022. In 2023, the Biden administration came out with its parole programs and CBP-1, and the problem has been almost eliminated, reduced by more than 90%.
Right now, it's almost eliminated, but it's still there. I mean, the parole program, probably in my opinion, is not the answer, but it is a good answer. What do these cartels charge right now for somebody coming across the border, somebody coming from Central America, somebody coming from China?
Well, it's staged based on where you're from. So you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000 if you're from Central America. If you're from China, they're going to charge you even more. So you're talking tens of thousands of dollars if you're being smuggled all the way from China. So it is a massive
The human
industry.
cost it's my understanding that if you're coming from Central America, 80% of the women, by the time they get to the border, will have been sexually assaulted or raped. So a lot of those ladies, before they actually undertake that trip, actually prepare their bodies for that eventuality. So taking the profit motive, I mean, do you have examples of people that you've run across? Have you met people in
Yes.
this situation?
Absolutely. I was in El Salvador in December, and I met with people who had planned to go to the border. They ended up getting a visa under the H-2B visa program. They abandoned that, and they said, I will never, now that I have the opportunity to go legally, I will never pay anyone to smuggle me or my family to the U.S.-Mexico border. So the
Can you explain to me what an
there with legal
H-2B
immigration.
visa is?
An H-2B visa is someone who's coming for non-seasonal agricultural employment in the United States. It has to be a temporary job. These particular positions were for Alaskan seafood. And he went to the United States, he made some money.
What
he came back.
nations have that availability to apply for these visas?
Well, there's a limited list of about 80 countries, but almost all of them go to Mexico. The Biden administration made a special effort set aside for the Northern Triangle, which allowed this gentleman to have the opportunity to get an H-2B visa and come to the United States legally.
Thank you very much. I would like to, I'm running out of time here, but I would like to hear later on, I'll present to you some questions about what other ways we can dismantle the cartels in the province. Wanted to go into the fentanyl issue, but we'll do that another time. Mr. Chairman, I ran out of time. I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank the witnesses for being here. And as a reminder, there's another committee in Congress, Judiciary, that handles immigration. This is the border security hearing, and we're talking about the security of the United States of America, just to set the stage for some of the testimony that we've heard. Mr. Ramirez, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a member of Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, a very proud organization. You mentioned the survey, the border security survey that the TSCRA has done. Would you be willing to share that with the committee?
Absolutely. If you find that valuable information, I could speak to our leadership and get it to you.
I would, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter that survey into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. You've had 5 generations of proud ranching history in your family on the ranch that you're on now. I just kind of want to put it in perspective for people. From your experience, have you seen a situation in those 5 generations that is like this, with the chaos, with the damages, the high-speed chases? I mean, have you seen anything like this past 2.5-year period previously?
Talking to my grandfather, who was raised on the ranch, and at least going back that far, he's never talked about a time where it was like it is now. People used to come across in smaller numbers from what he recalls and looking for work and were willing to work. And it wasn't the situation that it is now. The volume of people that are, and by the way, everything I talked about, this is 40 miles away from the border. And I have friends 100 miles away from the border that are going through the same situation. You know, these are people that, you know, they aren't walking or swimming across the river, throwing up their hands and letting themselves, you know, get documented or whatever happens there. These are people that are trying to circumvent that process.
What's causing it? I mean, from your experience there, talking to law enforcement, Border Patrol, what is causing this?
Well, there's certainly a reason to go through the trouble of hiring a coyote to take them through. That's an expensive process from what I understand. There's got to be a reason why they do not want to be documented. What that reason is, I don't know, but they are coming through in droves through our country.
And we're talking 5.5 million people that have been encountered. This notion that President Trump caused illegal immigration to surge is nonsense. And you have 1.5 million known gotaways, over 140 people who've matched the terror watch list that we know about this year. So I have more questions for you, but I want to move on to Ms. Tambunga. Thank you again for once again being in this committee room, for your heartfelt testimony. In previous conversations, you've discussed how the driver of the vehicle was recruited by the cartels, and there is a narrative that is in this committee and sometimes espoused by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that the cartels are not at all linked to the issue of illegal immigration. And I want to get your take on that, because I'm offended when I hear that, and I know that this is a very personal issue.
As far as the information that we know now, and this is coming from Texas DPS, that the driver, murderer of the vehicle, he was recruited on TikTok by the cartel.
Wow. I mean, when you hear that, and I hope my colleagues are listening to that we can talk economics, we can talk immigration, we can talk the things that was said by Mr. Byer, but we're talking about the security of our communities. That this person was recruited, that this person went on a high-speed chase over 100 miles an hour and tragically ended the lives of 2 people and changed the lives of this family forever. And that is directly linked to the massive amounts of people that are coming across illegally, not following law and order. Mr. Ramirez said in his testimony that these high-speed chases are a daily occurrence. And Ms. Tambunga, Mr. Bensman, anything to add to that based on either the community of Ozona or Mr. Bensman, what you in your research have seen?
Sure. I spend a lot of time on the border, on both sides of the border, talking to people and with law enforcement. There are so many high-speed chases in the borderlands for so long that there are certain communities that, for example, have built protective retaining walls around their schools. One town in Bracketville actually has developed a siren system, kind of like like if a tornado is coming, except it's like, here comes a car chase. They hit that and all the kids go under the desk. It is just absolutely rampant everywhere you go. It's like nothing anybody has ever seen.
Well, thank you, and my time has expired. I know my colleague, Mr. Gonzalez, has a very good piece of legislation on that exact issue, but Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Chairman. And, it was said earlier, and I agree, that we are a country of laws, we are a country of law and order, but agencies, administrations, all of us as citizens don't get to pick and choose which laws we follow. And I think it is important to note that under the law, migrants fleeing violence and persecution are entitled to claim legal asylum. That is not a law that we can just ignore. And so, Mr. Byer, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but is it not true that under the law, migrants who are fleeing persecution, fleeing violence, are entitled to apply for, and claim if they are granted legal asylum?
Absolutely. Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act makes it perfectly clear that anyone who is arriving in the United States or in the United States may apply for asylum, and that is a right protected under our laws. And further, other sections of the INA require this administration and any administration to refer them for a credible fear interview and interview that person to see if they're eligible.
So just to be clear, if an administration, this administration or any other, were to deny a migrant an interview to see if they qualify for legal asylum, that administration would be breaking the law, right?
Absolutely, and in fact, multiple courts have found that this administration and the last administration broke the law in doing that.
So let's turn the focus back onto the impact on American citizens from a failure to have a legal immigration system that is orderly and safe. Mr. Ramirez, I heard you talk, and I thank you for sharing your perspective, about the impact that migration and trafficking is having on your land and the land of your colleagues. Would it be easier for you if migrants were instead going to legal ports of entry to have their asylum claims processed than illegally going across your property or the property of your colleagues?
I would agree with that. With what we're dealing with, if it was structured, then that would eliminate the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important point that really cannot be lost here. That if we straighten out the system for people to have their applications processed at legal ports of entry, it would save everyone, particularly American citizens, a lot of violence and heartache and hassle. It was said or suggested by my friend on the other side that that's not the purview of this committee, that belongs under the jurisdiction of another committee. Well, if that was the case, my colleagues on this committee would not have passed a bill through this committee that did things like restrict the use of the CBP-1 app, which allows people, it's just an app that allows people to schedule an appointment at a legal port of entry to have their asylum claim processed. So I would just point out again, in the interest of border security, making the border safer for migrants and for American citizens, we need to have part of the conversation be how we make the system for claiming legal asylum at legal ports of entry more streamlined and safer and more accessible so that we can save everybody between the ports of entry a lot of pain and violence and heartache. I also just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of another issue. You know, it was H.R. 2, when that bill passed through this committee a couple months ago, one of the provisions gave the Department of Homeland Security some guidance on things that they should prioritize in their strategic plan, which is a good thing to do, and I agreed with much of it, as I know my colleagues on the Democratic side did as well. But there was a glaring omission, which was no mention whatsoever of the fact that 500,000 illegal guns a year are being trafficked from the United States to Mexico, arming the cartels. So I'll open up to any of you. Do any of you feel that it should be a priority of DHS to reduce the flow of weapons to the cartels? Or do any of you disagree with that? Let me rephrase.
Look, this is certainly a national security issue. The cartels are adversaries of the United States. There's no question about that. The fact that the United States citizens are participating in providing arms to this adversary is a legitimate function of government to intervene to prevent that from happening.
And I see my time's about to expire, so I'll just note, as a country of laws and law and order, we have to follow all the laws, and that includes cracking down on those who are illegally smuggling weapons to our adversaries on the other side of the border. Thank you for exploring these bipartisan potential solutions, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bensman, in your written testimony, you describe currently that we are experiencing the worst mass migration in American history. And you go on to set forth your background, what brought you to that conclusion. And then throughout your testimony, you talk about some of the impacts of that mass migration. And as a former prosecutor, I want to talk about one of those impacts that you began speaking about on page 5 of your written testimony. You describe it as a great unnecessary crime wave. And you continue over onto page 6 where you set forth that most U.S. states do not keep track of crimes committed by illegal immigrants, and neither does the federal government. And then you opine that only Texas tracks much of the crime by non-U.S. citizens. And then you cite roughly a decade of statistics from the Texas Department of Public Safety. And those statistics are found on page 7, that between June 1st, 2011 and July 31st, 2022, that there were 259,000 illegal aliens charged with more than 433,000 criminal offenses. And those were just in the state of Texas. That of those offenses, there were 800 charged with homicide, 822 charged with kidnapping, 5,470 charged with sexual assault, 6,485 charged with other sexual offenses, and 4,945 charged with weapon offenses. You then, Mr. Bensman, go on later on page 7 to talk about some of those cases in particular. You talk about that in the state of Texas on April the 29th, that there was a 5-time deported Mexican national who murdered 5 individuals. Then in the next paragraph, you talk about that in April 2023, that there were 2 former middle school students who were found dead, their car riddled with bullets. We know that seated to your left, Ms. Tambunja just testified in her opening statement about her tragic loss. And thank you for being here. I want you to let you know that our heart goes out to you for the loss of your mother, the loss of your child, but what you're doing here today by calling attention to that is extremely important. And so, Mr. Bensman, I also pulled just a couple of headlines in preparation for the hearing today from cases that had occurred this year. January 23rd, teenager arrested in rape and murder of autistic Maryland woman, was illegal immigrant and known MS-13 member. March the 7th of 2023, undocumented immigrant indicted on 11 counts of capital murder and abuse of a corpse that occurred in Montgomery, Alabama. June 2nd of 2023, 5 undocumented immigrants with ties to MS-13 charged with murder of Frederick Teen. And then the last one, the most recently, July 21st of this year, Mexican immigrant accused of grisly serial murders of 3 women in Dallas, Texas. Now, your findings contradict Mr. Byer, because Mr. Byer, in his written testimony and in his oral testimony, he says on page 21 of his written testimony that immigrants contribute to the safety and security of American communities. They directly lower the crime rate. He then went on in his opening statement to say that immigrants prevent crime. And so in the last minute of my time, Mr. Benson, I want to give you the opportunity to explain to this committee your findings as it relates to immigration and the effect that it has on crime, and contrast that with Mr. Byer's findings when he says that immigrants do not contribute to crime, and conversely, even says that they directly lower the crime rate. So in my last 30 seconds, Mr. Bensman, I'd ask you to please enlighten this committee and please educate us on your findings.
Okay, I have a whole 30 seconds to do that. I guess what I would tell you is that there is a comparative analysis that goes on, comparative research, where organizations try to compare illegal immigrant crime with crime rates committed by American citizens. That is completely faulty analysis. You cannot compare those two, mainly because 100% of all crimes committed by illegal immigrants are avoidable and unnecessary because they should have been deported, like the man who slaughtered the Hondurans next door. Whereas we're kind of stuck with American citizens one way or another, aren't we? There's no escape hatch for pushing American citizens into another country before they commit a crime. So 100% of all illegal immigrant crime is avoidable and unnecessary, in my opinion. All of these comparative studies are bogus and should never, ever be made. There should never be a comparison made between those two things. I understand why that's done. It's done for, I'm hearing snapping. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and we just recognize 30 seconds become a minute and 15, but that's okay. We get along in this committee. We now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very happy to follow up on that quite remarkable statement from Mr. Bensman. Let me ask you something, Mr. Bensman. Do you think that the more than 400 mass shootings in this country this year could also be avoided if we had universal background checks, if we did not sell weapons of war to civilians, if we had safe storage laws, if we had common sense gun legislation? Is it your view that every crime that's committed by an American citizen is not avoidable and therefore we should just accept it? I appreciate my colleague from Mississippi pointing out 4 incidents, the 4 articles that he cited of really terrible crimes that happened to be committed by people who were not here lawfully. But I don't see you giving us any headlines about the more than 400 random mass shootings that we have had in this country. And why are we talking about isolated incidents that you have to point out from 6 months ago when we have 2 mass shootings every day in this country? Why is it only the crime that happens to be committed by people who are not here somehow that you care so much about, and yet all of the devastating crime that is committed by people who are here doesn't matter? Because we don't ever talk about gun violence in this committee. We bring up, as my colleague from Rhode Island did, the fact that 500,000 guns are reportedly exported to Mexican cartels, because in Mexico they only have 1 gun shop that takes months to actually buy a gun, so the cartels cannot actually get the guns from themselves. They get them from the United States of America. They get the weapons of war, the assault weapons, from American manufacturers, who then funnel them to the cartels so they can control the fentanyl trade, they can control the border smuggling, and they can control and devastate communities both within their country and those trying to get into this country. So if we're really going to talk about border security and we're going to talk about the crime that those who are coming across, let's talk about the crime. The notion that comparisons of crimes committed by those who are here unlawfully and those who are here lawfully is bogus because it's all avoidable is the biggest bunk I've ever heard. Crime is crime. We got to be preventing crime of all sorts. And people have a right to escape persecution and gang violence and authoritarian governments from their own countries and come to this country to seek refuge in the United States of America, as we have been doing forever. And I will add for my colleagues, I come from New York City. In the last year, there have been more than 90,000 migrants who have come to New York City. And I'm not sitting here to cast blame as to how they got there. I'm only pointing out that they are here. And we are proudly sheltering them, feeding them, vaccinating them, helping them get on their feet so that they can pursue the American dream as so many of our ancestors did. But do you want to know something? You talk about crime. There has not been a single violent arrest in New York City from any of those more than 90,000 people. Not one. So you find me any other group of 90,000 people and no violent arrests, I challenge you. You can't do it. Because what they want is to come here and work. And what Mr. Beer has been talking about is that Those migrants who are coming here to work benefit our economy. And you know why they do? Because we have a workforce shortage. We have businesses who are desperate for labor and they can't get labor. These people, if they were given the opportunity to work, would become part of our communities, would pay taxes, would boost the economy, would take jobs that Americans are not taking. All of that would help our economy. But instead, we are here focusing on red herrings and completely tangential issues that don't get to the core of the problem. I had a lot of questions to ask, and obviously I have not, but I look forward to a second round because I get very frustrated when we're up here grandstanding and we're not actually working to address the real problems that we're facing. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize my colleague, Mr. Bishop from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes I don't like the topic that's come up for a hearing, but today the hearing is about effects of an unsecure border. So let me, Mr. Bensman, well, let me start with you, Ms. Tambunga. I kind of want to ask each of you. Mr. Beer, is it Beer? I think it's Beer, not Beyer. I just want to get your name right.
It's Beer, yes.
Yeah. Encapsulated, and we had some interaction one other time when you testified. You were a Democrat's witness one other hearing, and I think you've got a famous tweet from March of 2022 says, "My position is that the whole concept of legality in immigration law is a joke." I think that
That's
Mr. Bensman
wildly out of context.
Oh, you mean read the rest of the tweet?
Sure.
But my point here is that your argument to Dems why Biden shouldn't try to do as many pro-immigrant things as possible makes no sense. There is no risk that this comes back to bite immigrants. That's the full tweet. I still think the lead sentence is an interesting one, and I'll come back to you if I've got time. But the theme seems to be, at least for purposes of Mr. Pfluger's point, that we're talking about border security here as opposed to immigration policy, and it's hard to separate them a little bit. But Mr. Bensman, you said a moment ago that some of the crime issues or the loss, for example, Ms. Tambunga has suffered, Mr. Ramirez, your ranchers, that it shouldn't be because you've got the situation where it could have been prevented. The person shouldn't have been here in the first place. Mr. Beer's thesis is that won't work. You can't stop it. You can't really stop illegals coming across. What do you say to that?
Yes, you can stop illegals from coming across. We saw that happen with Title 42. We saw that happen with Remain in Mexico. Listen, I spend a lot of time south of the border interviewing thousands of immigrants. I have probably over the last 2 years interviewed thousands of them. And they are very rational, smart people. They make decisions about whether to journey and cross the border or not based on our policies.
Yeah.
They are smarter than most Americans because they have a self-interest on these policy questions. They're not coming because they're desperate. That's just a steady state wherever they are. Nobody wants to live in Haiti, but they're not going to come and actually spend the money on smuggling unless they know really to a high degree of probability that they're going to get in.
Mr. Ramirez, how about that? Is it futile to stop illegal immigration? Would there be things that could be done that would protect your ranches? In your opinion?
I really don't know. I don't know if that could happen. I don't know if you could put a structure in place because the people that are coming through us are avoiding the structure that's already in place.
Mr. Johnson, who was here a week or so ago, we had another joint hearing Mr. Higgins and I did in our subcommittees, and he was a rancher talking about a wall that was in progress. It was stopped right before it got to his property. He thought if there was a wall there, and we've heard Border Patrol folks tell us, I have over and over again, that walls can divert people into the place where, and maybe keep them off people's property. Is that something that you think is true?
I cannot build a wall big enough around the property, be able to afford that, and it work.
No, not you build it, but the United States government built it.
I don't know if that's the answer. I can't answer your question because there are plenty of professionals out there that are dealing with this, and I would say if someone within Border Patrol or another agency said, this is what we need to do, I would trust their opinion.
Yeah.
I'm here to discuss what we're dealing with because it's not controlled at the border.
Yeah. Ms. Tambunga, you most of all, what do you think about that? I mean, Mr. Beer's proposition, I think, is that the problem is that we try to restrain immigration. We should just let it all happen. Or at least a lot more of it. Now, see if I can I'm not going to have time to get to him probably, but what do you say to that? What's your opinion?
I've never once said that I'm against this at all. We're sixth generation. My family came here correctly. We came here to work. They did all of the legal steps they needed to. I have a friend right now who's waited 7 years to get his wife, and he has to explain to his 3 kids why his wife can't come over here yet.
Yeah.
My problem is the problems that come with those that want to cause trouble. I wake up every day and I can tell you the silence gets louder every single day. And it's just not for my family, but for our community. I'll tell you that on the day of our burial for them, we got informed that there was another high-speed chase only 30 miles away from us again that had 12 illegal immigrants and ended in a car crash near Sonora. It's nonstop, and when I say that this is not an if it's gonna happen again problem, it's a when it's gonna happen again problem. So I think that we need to have adequate funding and adequate training for our policemen. The night of our accident, only 1 trooper was covering the entire state of I-10. That's unacceptable.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry for your losses.
Gentleman yields. I recognize Mr. Thanadar for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins. I'm sitting here listening to the conversation in this room, and I understand some people don't look at this as a humanitarian problem. I understand some people don't look at this as helping those who are escaping poverty or political persecution and the hardship that they are coming away from. But purely looking at this from a business point of view, purely looking at this from an economy, American economy, American businesses are hurting for skilled workforce. And we're turning away so many skilled employees that is affecting our productivity. Loss of our productivity as a result is close to $1 trillion by some estimates. Because of this paranoia and anti-immigrant thinking, we're hurting our businesses. We're hurting healthcare. We're hurting workforce for agriculture, workforce for service employees. The same kind of a thinking I experienced back in 1979 when I was 24 years old, living in poverty in India, and I wanted to come to this country to do better for myself and for my family. And I was trying to access a legal pathway to come here on a student visa. The American embassy denied my student visa 4 times. And at the 5th time, I gave them the same papers they rejected my visa on, and another counselor looked at it and approved those. And that's how I was able to come here, get my PhD in chemistry, work as a chemist, innovate, get patents, then became a serial entrepreneur, created hundreds of jobs across America. And now I have the honored to be able to represent 750,000 Americans for my great district, to represent them and their interest and fight for them in the United States Congress. Now, I was lucky. I was very lucky. But many others are not. We have, by some estimate, 9.8 million jobs available that are currently not filled by Americans or by immigrants. And we have lost over $1 trillion in productivity because of our broken immigration system and because of our unwillingness to fix the broken immigration system. Now, interestingly, countries like Canada and Australia are taking advantage of our broken immigration system. And let me give you a fact. Canada established last July the first immigration program that hinges entirely on our system by offering 10,000 work permits to foreigners who are already in the United States on H-1B visas. These are highly skilled people. Many of them have bachelor's, master's, PhD's degrees, advanced engineering degrees that could make a huge difference to our productivity, huge difference to American innovation, will make a huge difference for us to compete with countries like China. Now, this demand that Canada is taking advantage of, their policy change, they were able to give, within 48 hours, all of these 10,000 work permits that Canada offers were taken up. America lost 10,000 talented individuals waiting for their green cards in the United States. These families frustrated with the long green card lines, long delays, in some cases 10,000, 15,000 delays. So this is really the real problem, my colleagues. We are closing our doors to talented and skilled individuals that want to give their talent to this country, just like I tried to prove that almost 40 years ago. 4 times I failed, but I persisted and I'm here. Unfortunately, my time is up, so I will yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many people talk about the southern border. I represent it. There's 1,254 miles in Texas. I represent 2/3 of that. Mr. Ramirez, I've been on your ranch. I almost didn't recognize you without your hat. I swear you would sleep with that thing. Thank you for being here today. And we've seen it. We've had the discussion firsthand. Ms. Tambunga, you look wonderful. It's great to see you up here. Mr. Tambunga, you look wonderful as well. Thank you for coming up here and sharing your story. There is not one person in my district, and honestly, throughout Texas, that doesn't have a story in some form or fashion, that isn't connected in some form or fashion to a tragic situation. Whether that's the high-speed chase that went through Ozona, whether that's a high-speed chase that went through Uvalde and wrecked a car that hurt the mother of one of my commissioners in Valverde County, whether that's Ronnie Dotson, who's a sheriff out in Brewster County that every week finds bodies in his jurisdiction, whether it's ranchers in Dryden, Texas, that have had their water lines cut. I mean, there is not one person, whether it's the schools in Uvalde, thankfully we're in break right now, but that we're going into lockdown 3 times a week. And so I find it very frustrating to how do we get attention to this issue? It seems as if the federal government, to include Congress has an equal role and is equally responsible. The President of the United States and Congress have abandoned my district, have abandoned the 23rd District of Texas. How do we fix that? And to me, all roads go back to the President of the United States. No matter how I skin it, no matter how you look at it, it's the President of the United States that's going to have to enforce the laws that are on the books. But it's Congress's job to be the power of the purse and give them tools to do that and update these very ancient laws that no longer make sense. But I'm frustrated. What do we have to do? How many people have to die? How many people have to drown? How many ranchers have to lose their property? How many schools have to go into lockdown before some action takes place? And I'm very offended because a year ago, I hosted the President of the United States in my district, in Uvalde, and I pulled him aside and I said, Mr. President, now isn't the time or the place, but I'd like to sit with you and talk to you about the border and some solutions on how we can fix this. The man looked me right in the eye and he said, absolutely, Tony. A year later, the only discussion I've had is with a staffer, and round we go, and it's unacceptable. I don't know what it's gonna take in order to get the President of the United States to engage on this topic. I was against impeaching President Trump. I view impeachment as in case of emergency, break glass. But are we at that point where this is an emergency? One. Two, is there something that Congress can do to move the ball forward? Is there even something small? Is there something Congress, not Republicans, not Democrats, can come together and do one thing in order to get this crisis under control? Ms. Tambunga, you brought up a piece of legislation that we're working on, the Koch Act, which essentially creates an awareness. If there is a high-speed chase coming through town, you get notified on your phone to basically stay the hell away, get away. That may save lives. Are there some immigration things? Are there some work visa options that can get us to a point? How do we enforce the laws that are already on the books? How do we prevent bad actors from entering this country? But also, how do we abide by the laws that we already have? I think there's an opportunity there, but it's gonna take some bold leadership, and I think it's gonna start in this committee and others like it. And if we don't, round and round we go, we're gonna find more bodies, there's gonna be more innocent Americans hurt, and it's just it feels like we're at a dead end. But it's gonna be Congress that solves that. And that should scare the hell out of everybody. But if Congress doesn't solve it, how is anyone else going to solve it? So thank you for coming here today. Thank you for giving your testimony earlier. This is an important issue that won't go away because of folks like you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia, for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank all of our witnesses that are here today. Thank you for your testimony. And certainly anyone that's been impacted personally and their family or have had loss, I just want to send my condolences as well. I think it's always hard to hear these stories. But I want to just focus again that we're back to another hearing where the House majority continues to claim that the border is somehow wide open, a myth that we have disproved time and time again through testimony by frontline officials here in front of this committee. The border is not open, it never has been, and certainly there are challenges and investments that need to be made. We're also, I believe the administration is trying their best, and we can see with the numbers, particularly over these last few months, that actually border crossings have dropped. Now, I also want to note that Democrats, like those in the majority, want a safe and secure border. We know we must crack down also on the smuggling of people, and ways to address this, of course, is also to look at asylum and legal pathways to enter the U.S. rather than relying on criminal traffickers. I'd also want to remind the people and the people that are watching, the American public, that every member of the Republican House majority, they actually voted to eliminate the Shelter and Services Program, which provides the most effective federal support for bordered communities. Bordered communities actually need more support, not less. And I think we are committed to increasing and improving federal support through these programs. But I want to actually focus on something, Mr. Beer. Republicans continue this narrative that's apparently easy to immigrate to the U.S. and that anyone can access a legal pathway. So I want to turn to a chart which you actually submitted in your written testimony and how you actually describe how we can actually enter and actually go through the immigration process. Mr. Beer, this looks not simple and quite complex. Can you briefly explain to the committee what I'm actually looking at here?
Right, so this is a flow chart. You start at the top, you have to first get vaccinated, go through all the baseline requirements to immigrate. You can't be a serious criminal, you have to go through the security checks. That's all very difficult. That's even before you get to the pathways that are available. The refugee program, we've got 100 million displaced people around the world.
Absolutely.
The United States took 25,000 of those. We have the family-based system. We have first the diversity lottery. That's 32 million applicants for 55,000 slots. Family-sponsored, we got 7 million people awaiting in a backlog
and Mr.
for
Beer,
U.S. citizens and legal
absolutely, and I
permanent
think that this does not describe at all what my Republican colleagues describe as a system that is actually easy to navigate for folks coming into this country. Nor, I believe, and I would ask you, does this actually show a welcoming and humane immigration system at work?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Beer, do you think this is a process that's easy and straightforward to navigate? Because it certainly doesn't look that way to me.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult.
And are these current pathways, as we have them here up on this factually accurate description of how our immigration system works, do you think this is functioning properly?
Absolutely not. It's breaking down at every single stage.
And so I want to clarify, and you mentioned some of this. In our refugee program, for example, we admit 25,000 out of a global refugee population of 100 million. That's less than 1%. In fact, 0.01%. We'd be the 57th as far as accepting refugees in the world. Not the first, as some of the House majority appear to believe, but we're actually be the 57th in the world of accepting refugees. Employer-sponsored green cards have a backlog of over 1.4 million, and it's virtually impossible to obtain those without very high wage offers. We have a labor shortage in this country, something that was not being addressed. And the diversity green card lottery offers entrants just a 0.2% chance of receiving a green card. So this is a very complex system that we currently have. I want to, though, just maybe turn to a simpler chart that maybe more folks can understand. Mr. Beer, now my colleagues on the other side continue to demonize and scapegoat immigrants, but am I correct that immigrants are actually far less likely to commit crimes than the native-born American population that this chart clearly shows?
That's right. In fact, this data comes from the Census Bureau. This isn't collected by the Cato Institute. And it's backed up by a lot of other research besides just the measurement here, which is who's incarcerated in the United States.
Thank you. And I want to just be clear, we have, of course, legal immigrants here. We have undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants that's listed at least on this chart, and then native-born Americans, which clearly shows that actually the most crime that's committed in the United States is not from legal immigrants, it's not from undocumented immigrants, it's actually from native-born Americans. Now, Mr. Beer, I know that my colleagues continue to spread propaganda about chaos at the border. Isn't it also true that border communities are actually safer than other communities? Isn't that also factually correct?
That's right. They have a lower crime rate.
And the FBI crime data also shows this as well. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
So thank you. I just wanted to close. I came to the U.S. as a young child, immigrated here to the United States. I love this country. It's the best country on earth. I hope we're able to build a country that welcomes other young people like myself. We can actually contribute, give back, become a teacher, and one day serve in Congress. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell.
Mr. Ramirez, you live on the border, correct?
About 40 miles from the border, yes, sir.
You said earlier in your statement that you and your family are in fear for your lives. You have to look over your shoulder when you're sitting in your
backyard. We fear for the dangerous situation that we're in because there are many, many people present on the ranch at any given time, and we don't know if they're friendly or not.
Can you shed a light on, I'll let you guys do the talking. Can you shed a light for me on what the towns themselves, the infrastructure, is that being scuttled because of the mass immigration, legal immigration that's coming across the border? For instance, like the restaurants, the grocery stores, the first responders, the hospitals. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Well, I live in the middle of nowhere. I don't live in town. They are going through us to get here or another city in between. What's going on there, I can't speak to.
Mr. Benson, the statistics that you threw out in your statement, that's my district. And I share that district with Mr. Babin. And in the past 2 years, I just got done talking with my sheriff in San Jacinto County. In the past 2 years, there's been 2 shootings, 2 mass shootings with the AR platforms that are in discussion, both of which were with illegal immigrants. That's it. In San Jacinto County, I would venture to say over 85% of the people have that type of weapon system in their home or in their truck. That lends itself to we raise our kids right. Can you elaborate, please, on what you saw in Liberty County as far as the school districts go, again, for me?
I'm sorry, in which county?
Liberty County.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, it's overcrowded. It's struggling with an unanticipated onslaught of people moving in, foreign nationals who don't speak the language. They tell me many of them are not legally present. The community there has been described as the largest community of illegal immigrants in the United States.
75,000.
Yes.
Right in my district. I
Yes.
feel it. I feel the pressure. 10,000 children make up a school district. We went from 3,000 to 20,000.
Yes.
San Jacinto, Polk, Liberty counties are some of the poorest, not only in the state, but in the country. It is unsustainable. We know that this is a problem, but the administration is doing nothing to course correct this issue. Ms. Tambuga, it's great to see you again. I'm sorry, this is our second time, and I hate that it's in this chamber. Mr. Beer, you said that immigration is the antidote to crime. Can you elaborate on that for me, please?
Well, it's the antidote to the recent rise in crime that started in 2020. We've seen that immigrant communities are less likely to commit crimes than
immigrants that come through the
and
process
they revitalize dying communities, which prevents crime.
Immigrants that come through the ports of entry properly?
Both.
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 So what if immigration is the antidote to crime, what's illegal immigrants in our country?
What are they? They're people without legal status in the United States.
Given the numbers that we see in the crime rate, are you aware of the sex trafficking number in the United States and what that looks like with women and children?
The number?
Yeah, the number. You don't know that statistic?
Not
what I
off
understand,
the top of my head, no.
The number of men, women, and children being trafficked is more than any time in history. You aware of that? Right now, here in the United States. You aware of that? You think that's coming through a secure border?
No, it's
I
not.
don't think so either.
I want a secure border. I want it very secure.
And
I
we
want
do
people
too.
to come in
In your
legally.
opinion, do
I
you
want
think the
people
border's
to come in
secure?
legally.
In your opinion, do you think the border's secure?
Absolutely not. I want people to come in legally so we can free up Border Patrol to go after people who are serious criminals and threats.
Glad to hear you say that, sir. Thank you. I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Ramirez is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins. As we conclude our last border subcommittee hearing before the August recess, it's been about 8 months. 8 months, and every single week in subcommittee or full committee, regardless of the committee I'm on, it's always about the border. The border, the border, the border. And it is beyond evident that the Republican majority has spent more time spreading dangerous misrepresentations of the reality at the border, which I agree is not secure. It's not secure for the immigrants who are trying to cross and risking their lives because their circumstances in their small towns, like Chiquimula or Concepcion Las Minas or wherever that is, it's so bad. They're willing to risk their lives. It's not secure for them, and it certainly isn't secure for all of us because we don't have a pathway. There isn't a pathway. I mean, you just saw Congressman Garcia just show us the process, and I'm sure you got a headache. I got a headache because I have a lot of family who's tried to navigate that process and have been denied. This here, I'm gonna be honest, as a Latina here, as a daughter of immigrants, as the only one whose mother crossed the border pregnant with her, feels unsafe for me. It feels like dehumanizing and criminalizing of Black and brown asylum seekers at the southern border. As a committee and as a Congress, the actual work for us should be, we want a legal pathway to immigration, so let's work on it in bipartisanship. When you wanna do that, I am happy to work with you to do that. Because I don't think anyone wants to be sex trafficked. I don't think anyone wants to die in the Rio Grande. And I certainly know that no one wants to die from dehydration as they're trying to cross Texas, Arizona, or California. Mr. Bensman, You told Fox News, Laura Ingraham, that the United States should not provide asylum to Ukrainians fleeing Russia's brutal war because, quote, they're doing great for a group of war refugees. You alleged in New York Post that Venezuelan migrants seeking asylum in the United States are engaging in, quote, a massive fraud against the United States because, among other things, they, and I quote, head for border crossings wearing the latest fashions, often sporting name brand labels. You have even gone as far as to describe asylum, which has helped some of the most persecuted and vulnerable humans find shelter in American democracy, as a failed system. Mr. Bensman, can you enlighten us on who, if not Ukrainians escaping a war of aggression, if not Venezuelans and Syrians escaping murderous dictators, if not Haitians escaping mass violence, who do you think should be allowed to seek asylum in the United States?
Regarding the Ukrainians,
No, I'm asking you, who do you think should be allowed to seek asylum in the United States?
let me just respond to that first, because the Ukrainians had standing offers from 27 of the best countries in the world to live for 3 years, every EU country. They did not need to be coming to our southern border. My point was that our southern border was in such terrible disarray.
Sorry, I'm reclaiming my time. I need to make sure that I clarify my question. What I want to know, who do you believe, what country, what group of people, what do they look like? Who are the people that you believe should be able to seek asylum in the United States? That's what I want to know.
Well, I think a lot of people do seek asylum in the United States when they fly in, when they have visas, when they...
I'm going to reclaim my time.
when they
Thank you. I'm going to reclaim my time. You're not telling me who. So I want you to look at this image here. I want you to all look at it.
politically...
These are, excuse me, sir, I reclaim my time. Thank you. So these are 56 people who just became citizens in my district about 2 months ago. Look at their face. Look at their pride. Some of them, it took them 35 years to finally become a U.S. citizen. Many of them, 90% of them, had to enter this country undocumented because they had no choice. And yet they spend 30, 35 years working towards immigration reform for them because their child turned 18 or because a family member sponsored them. They are proud Americans. They are not rapists. They are not sex mules. They are not human traffickers. They are everyday people who are social workers, mentors, teachers. I need us, as we go into August recess, to look within ourselves and ask ourselves, if you actually care about the border, let's work on creating a pathway to legal migration to this country. I'm also anxious to work with all of us for immigration reform. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to everybody who came to testify before this committee today. Wow. No wonder we are in this spot. If y'all don't get it, if y'all just get a chance to go watch this entire hearing, for all of you Americans out there that are wondering why we have this just complete invasion at our southern border, this hearing will give you a really good idea of why. You know, the amount of gaslighting and misdirection that I've heard in this chamber today could choke the average American with complete frustration. It's really not chaotic. It's really not a big problem. The numbers are down. We've seen the slides. We've seen the graphs and the charts of that. It's really our Second Amendment that's causing this problem. The right that we have to keep and bear arms. That's really the problem. The other problem is, obviously, walls are hurting people. Walls don't work. They're archaic. People are falling off them, getting hurt. It's unbelievable to me. You know, it's sad, Mr. Bensman, because I've been following you for a while, and I know that this is a big issue to you. You've been following it for a long time, haven't you, sir? You know, I listen to my colleagues, and, you know, it's interesting because I never hear them talk about the genesis of this whole thing. Mr. Bensman, did you hear President Biden during his campaign talk about, did you hear some of the quotes that he said about people coming to this country? And basically telling people, hey, if you want to come here and you're fleeing oppression, you can come. Did you hear that?
From all 15 candidates for the Democratic primary, they were kind of trying to outdo each other on policy, who could open the door the widest, who could let the most in, and believe me, they heard it.
Yeah, just for clarification, those quotes, Democratic debate on September 12th of 2019, we're a nation who says if you want to flee and you're freeing oppression, you should come. Democratic debate, June 27th of 2019, and those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, even though we don't. Keep them safe until they can be heard. Mr. Bensman, what do you think was going to happen when you heard the possible president of the United States saying those things?
Well, I was in southern Mexico during some of those debates, and I interviewed, very surprised to find many immigrants heading to the northern border, which was closed under Trump policies, to wait for the day a Democrat won and Trump lost. I had lots of interviews with people in February, March of 2020, months before the election. They started moving just on those campaign promises.
Mr. Ramirez, you were probably out tending to your cattle or showing some hunter around your ranch, but did you happen to hear those comments from candidate Biden at the time?
Yes, sir.
Did you think your life was about to get a little bit more difficult?
I didn't know it was going to happen in the volume that it did.
What do you think when you sit in this chamber and you hear my colleagues on the other side who don't ascribe any credit to those words and what a presidential candidate was saying?
I don't know what I'd say. What I'm here to say is that ranchers, people that try to feed this country, are being impacted in a very serious way. And we are being impacted because we are not securing the border.
Ms. Tambunga, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Bunga?
Tambunga.
Tambunga. Thank you for coming here today, and I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I did hear you say that our government has let you down. Is that correct, ma'am?
That's correct.
Can you expand on that a little bit? How has this government let you down?
Failing to see the problem. I'm going to say something, and I'm going to say this one thing to every person up there right now. I have been in this room twice now, and it is offensive as an American citizen, as a person of the people, to see you up here constantly bickering, going back and forth. I have given you a problem. What happened to my family is a problem. What is happening to Mr. Ramirez is a problem. And I feel like now I'm a mother here without a child to scold, but here I am scolding you because I'm disappointed in your work, your lack of efforts to work together. Here is the problem we're presenting. Fix it. Put your egos and your pride aside and fix it.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Gentlewoman from Georgia. I apologize. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized.
Let me thank the chairman and ranking for their leadership on a very important issue. And I was delayed because I was in a number of hearings, including judiciary and on the floor with military construction and in the Rules Committee. But I wanted to be here because I think it is important to find really the root of our dissension and emphasize that I think we should be beyond that, because I have every confidence that Democrats are concerned about America, that they have been instrumental in writing some of the most effective immigration reform legislation that protects people at the border. I am from Texas and have been to the border and do not live on the border, been to the border on many different aspects of trying to protect it, from being on the lines where the fences were being drawn and various institutions rejecting having the fence there, to the surge of unaccompanied children out of desperation, to parents and children being separated from each other. I diminish no witness on this panel. Everyone deserves to be heard. But what I would like to say, since this is dealing with the question of terrorism and as well the Border Security Committee, having served on both of them, I just want to emphasize in particular that let's deal with facts. Let's deal with facts and the level, if you will, of terrorism that has come across the southern border. Yes, our very fine personnel have been able to detect those, and they should be commended for that. That is not the normal population that comes across. In addition, we have found that the people who are dying, excuse my voice, are like us, the mothers, fathers, children. And it seems that a country this big can find a way to deal with comprehensive immigration reform. That there is a pathway for people to come so that terrorists and criminals cannot come. This era in the world is the largest migration of people all over the world. I believe that we have given a mountain of resources to Customs and Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection. I believe they have done a sizable job on fentanyl, but it keeps coming. I think we have to do things about use, addiction, and I also think we have to maintain a certain dignity. And so actions by the Lone Star effort that our state has implemented require restraint. Taking human beings and dumping them in the midst of freeze in front of the Vice President's home, I think is unacceptable. Mr. Ramirez and Miss, is it Tambunga?
Tambunga.
I will get my staff to brief me because I don't want to delay it on your circumstances. But at the same time, I have to put on the record that kind of behavior doesn't solve the problem. The behavior of razor fence and boys does not answer your concern, but it does cause, as not by my words, by a duly hired trooper, water not being given, as well as women having miscarriages, as well as a little boy's leg being broken. So my commitment on this committee, Mr. Chairman, as I reach a close, is to always fight terrorism. I've been on this committee since the creation of it in the aftermath of 9/11. Don't want to give a lot of history, but I was here in this Capitol when that heinous act occurred. I have no qualms about fighting terrorism. At the same time, I've been in every cutting-edge reform bill that we've tried to pass to give you relief and to also separate out, as they say, the weeds from the flowers. We don't need to coddle criminals. We don't need to, in essence, block businesses. We don't need to have blockades by our state government either, and blacking up just about a year ago. What we need is a concrete look to how we take out from this country those who will do us harm, terrorists and others who may have come to perpetrate crimes, and certainly that includes the cartels. But I don't think we get anywhere by suggesting that every door must be closed to people who are fleeing and who represent what we have seen over the years of people fleeing persecution, prosecution, to come to this country and ultimately having children that will contribute great things to this nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the indulgence that you've given me. I won't ask any questions because I know we're at the end, and I will be happy to yield back. Thank you so very much.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take just a minute to point out that our colleague on our committee talked about how there needs to be a pathway for citizenship while also showing a picture of all the citizens or the people that just became citizens in her district. Clearly, there is a legal path for citizenship, and there has been for a very long time in the United States of America. The problem is that our policies and our laws are being completely abused. And in the current administration, we have a policy of open borders that is causing unbelievable crime. Over 300 Americans killed every single day, as well as American citizens because of illegal crimes. Ms. Tambunga, I want to acknowledge what you said. You said something very powerful. You're tired of the bickering and you want us to fix it. And I want to acknowledge your words. And as one mother to another, I completely agree with you. And I also want to express my deepest sympathies for your loss. What was your daughter's name?
Amelia Brooke.
Amelia, and she was 7 years old.
She's 7 years old.
7 years old. And you lost your mother as well in this accident. And my understanding from your testimony is that your mother and your beautiful little angel were killed when they're in a human trafficking, basically illegal operation.
Correct.
Is that correct? I'm very sorry. And do you believe that your mother and your daughter would be alive today if we had secure borders?
I do believe that. Let me note that this could happen to anyone, and this literally happened when they were 2 minutes away from home. One stoplight away from my house. And to go on, Ms. Lee, you said we'll speak about facts. The fact is that my daughter and my mother are 6 feet under. The fact is that when I want to sing my daughter her special bedtime song, I have to go to the cemetery. The fact is that a few years ago, 2 doors down from my dad's house, 2 Honduran immigrants shot, executed an Ozona citizen in his own home. That's a fact. That's a fact I urge you to look into as well, because this isn't just one incident. This is multiple incidences over a long period of time now. Another fact is that only one trooper was able to get to us. One trooper working a whole stretch of I-10. People from Eastland, policemen from Eastland were supposed to be helping. Eastland are hours away. The fact is we don't have adequate training and we don't have adequate funding for our policemen either. Those are the facts that I'd like you to focus on.
Thank you, Ms. Tambunga, and you're right. We should focus on those facts. Are you a U.S. taxpayer, correct?
I sure am, since I was 16 years old.
So your hard-earned tax dollars that you've worked for your entire life and paid to the federal government, do you feel that your tax dollars, as well as American citizens' tax dollars, should go for the safety, protection, and defense of not only our U.S. border, but your family, your mother and your daughter? They should have protected them as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And to add to the fact, speaking for my father, he served 13 years in the Marine Corps, and this is how he's repaid. Think of that too.
I thank your father. We thank your father for his service to our country. So your father defended the United States of America's national security interest, and now your mother and your 7-year-old daughter, as you stated, are 6 feet under,
right,
because of the failures of the federal government and protecting your family, protecting your father's family. I'm so sorry. That is an unspeakable failure. This is something that you should never have endured. You shouldn't suffer this every single day, as I'm sure you do. This isn't anything your father should suffer every single day. It's a failure of the federal government. It's a failure of the administration. It shouldn't matter what political party it is. The job of the federal government is to use your hard-earned tax dollars, as you stated, that you've been earning and paying since you were 16, should be completely for the defense of our nation and the protection of its citizen. Thank you, Ms. Tambunga. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you for your testimony. Again, I'm very sorry for your tragic loss. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Brasheen, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just last week at the Aspen Security Forum, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, referred to the inflow of illegal immigrants into our country. He referred to them as non-citizens. If you think about that, it really says a lot as to where this administration is. And, you know, to think what would happen if he was more concerned with solving this problem than being politically correct. Mr. Ramirez, you are a representative of 26,000 different cattle producers.
That is correct.
In Texas, and I know Representative Pfluger, myself, others on this panel grew up ranching. How has this impacted your ability for your family to feel safe and secure on your place, on your property?
Well, we live with a constant presence on the ranch. It is constant. The ranch that we live on now is about 20 miles from north to south. And on any given day, you could travel around the ranch, and any road going from west to east has tracks on it every day. Trash everywhere, litter everywhere. We just never know who's coming through that's friendly or not. So it is a constant danger that we feel. You know, my daughters, I have 2 daughters, 8 and 10 years old, and they live on one of the most beautiful ranches in Texas. And they should be able to, as I did when I grew up, go down to the barn and feed their horses alone. You know, doing some of these things that instills trustworthiness and work ethic in our children. And the environment that we live in does not lend itself because of the safety factor to allow them to do these things on their own.
Yeah, when we have hundreds of those on the terrorist watch list that have been apprehended at the border in the last couple of years, it kind of sends a signal. Is my daughter safe patrolling the ranch on her own? Mr. Benson, you have been speaking extensively about your time, seeing from both sides of the border, unique opportunity to kind of look at that. Once you have opportunity to just kind of talk about just the things that you've seen that are just astounding to you, that maybe you've not had a chance thus far in this hearing to talk about. Whether it's the cartel, the enrichment of the cartel, whether it's the human trafficking element.
I mean, honestly, in all the years that I've been covering the border or have been spent my time down there in both sides, I just have never seen the volumes, the numbers, just the thousands and thousands of people just pouring over like a D-Day invasion, land 5 boats at a time, and then they turn back and they get more, and they're just, that I think is what stunned me. And honestly, you know, when I talk to Border Patrol guys and women down there who were working it too for years and years, none of them had ever seen anything like it too. It's not propaganda, it's videotaped. And also I would point out that on the issue of asylum, you know, I've interviewed, you have to be politically persecuted to claim asylum on one of 5 grounds. I won't get into all of that. But I have grocery bags of abandoned ID cards, abandoned in Mexico, and passports, because those ruin your credible fear interview. If you have those, they tell you where they tell our guys where you've been, and for the last 5 or 10 years, not in the country you're saying you were from. There is mass fraud in the asylum system. All of the immigrants that I interview, I would say almost all of them say they're coming to work. That is not a ground for asylum.
Yeah. It was mentioned earlier in this committee, a member said, look, if you look at the 90,000 people, the men who attempted to intervene when migrants outside the shelter started throwing objects at people on a sidewalk in Harlem. The New York City Police Department said the officers responded to reports of an assault. Central Park, Madison Avenue. Just, contradicting this narrative that we're talking about bringing people in that are, you would think if you're breaking the law to get here, maybe, and you've got 200 people on the terrorist watch list, and it's not just people coming directly from Mexico, almost representative of almost all nations, we might have some bad actors. And so I've got one last question here. Mr. Bensman, what national security interest do you fear? What keeps you up at night given what you've seen?
I look at this as a massive stranger danger issue. The majority of people that are crossing that border, whether they're runners and gotaways or just giving up, we have no idea who they really are. We don't know whether they're war criminals. I've met probably immigrants from every single country on the continent of Africa, interviewed them. I can't think of one that I haven't met. I met my first Dagestanis about a month ago down there. My first Kyrgyzstan, my hotel in Matamoros was filled with Kyrgyzstanis. They're coming from the entire planet, and we don't have the ability to ask for an intel share or a criminal database check from like any of these places. Somebody said, well, everybody's vetted. We've done checks. I'm hearing snapping, but point being that that the vast majority of people that I see crossing in, giving up, and running are complete strangers to us. We have no idea what they did in their home country.
The gentleman yields. The ranking member has.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record articles from Undocumented Migration Project and Colibri and from Human Rights Watch that detail migrant deaths at the border.
Without objection, I also have a letter to enter to the record regarding the case of Mr. Torben Sondergaard, who is a legal immigrant from Denmark, came to our country legally, applied for asylum properly, had no criminal charges. He was arrested for overstay of his visa. He's been incarcerated in solitary confinement for over 1 year. He'd been persecuted by this administration and targeted, we believe, because he's an evangelical Christian minister. I'd like to enter this to the record without objection.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to submit another article.
The ranking member is recognized.
China's fading recovery reveals deeper economic struggles.
Without objection, letters are entered into the historical record. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony today and their painful representations of what you've been through. We thank you as a committee. The members of the subcommittees may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that the witnesses respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.